everyone, Coffee here for Spin Legends. Today I'm giving you guys a little bit of insight into bluff raising the river. Now this is something I think a lot of people don't have in their games, and can be a really important tool in a lot of situations. What I want to focus on it today is looking at what makes a good bluff raising hand. What are the best hands to pick in that situation? We probably don't want to bluff very much, so if we're not going to bluff very much, we might as well pick our best hands. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out that the most important effects are blocker effects. Now, blocker effects are where my hand will block some of my opponent's range. Now, if we block a particular part of villain's range, we can sort of gain fold equity, essentially, from that. We are bluff raising, so we want to fold out more hands. So the idea when we're looking to use blocker effects for bluff raising is we're going to want to block our opponent's bet calling range, but not block their bet folding range. So we want to make sure we don't block bluffs, but then we want to try to block as many hands that will call our raise. So these are typically very strong hands. So let's try to take a look at an example. So here's a hand where we're playing against an unknown player. So this is almost guaranteed not a regular, although I'm not actually sure. This hand was played a while ago. It's plausible. I mean, I don't want to insult anyone if they are a regular. But as far as I was concerned, in the hand, they were, a readless player, a readless fun player, most likely. So we have a pair here, so we check call flop, pretty standard. Villain barrels turn, super small. We get pretty good price to pay. And the river's an ace, and our opponent barrels the river, but very small. So when you see these small bets, this is a great indicator that bluff raising makes sense. Smaller sizes indicate weaker ranges, thinner ranges, ranges that have a lot, are weighted more towards weak single pair rather than strong hands like two pair or strong top pair. So already I'm thinking, raising seems like a good option here. I could think about calling my queen eight. It's not a super big bet, but the problem is that I still kind of lose to a lot of that value range, right? I beat bluffs, but when my opponent bets small on flop turn and then river, they're actually representing more thin value stuff than bluffs. And I still lose to all the pairs of tens and kings. Now I do beat eights. Oh no, we don't beat eights, we chop with them, right? No, we do beat eights because our kicker plays, sorry. Ace, king, queen, pair of eights. So there is some merit to thinking about flatting here. I think it's okay. I think a worse eight for sure. But the bluff raising blocker effects are really good here. So when I go in for the raise, notice that my queen blocks queen jack. So if my opponent's making a sneaky trap on the river, queen jack is the only nuts here. So that certainly will be in villain's bet calling range. If they bet it, they're certainly always calling a shove. So it's really nice to block that. And then on top of that, notice that my pair of eights is actually useful blocker effect. Because I have a pair of eights, I block ace eight, 10-8, and king eight, all hands that will certainly bet call if we raise. Now we could argue how much villain takes this line with those hands, but the idea is that if they do, they're always calling the raise, so blocking them is only going to be a good thing. 8 deuce as well. If our opponent, was just trying to trap us, maybe they were trying to induce a raise, like who knows? In that case, we block some of those specific hands. And then when you think about it, we don't really block very many bluffs. Queen high in particular is less likely to bluff the river, probably because it has a little bit of showdown. It still might, but it's less likely. And then on top of that, the queen highs that would barrel turn maybe as a bluff, or queen nine. We block maybe queen nine, but again, less likely to bluff river. So we don't, and the pair of eights also means that we don't really block bluffs. Our eight doesn't block any bluffs because it's a pair, right? So our opponent wouldn't be bluffing a pair. If they are, it doesn't really matter for us. They're probably folding it. So, but yeah, we don't really care too much about that, and it means that again, it's not blocking hands that would fold, right? If we had a random hand like if we had queen nine ourselves here, notice that the 9 would be blocking stuff like jack 9. And even just, random 9-6 or 9-5. By having a pair, you don't do that. So we don't block almost any bluffs, and we block some value range. So go in for the raise, we get the sweet fold, feel good. All right, let's take another one. Look another one. This is against a regular. I limp pre-flop, intending to actually probably call shoves because this regular's ISOing a lot. But we get to play post. See bet the flop, which this could be a check back, but it's fine to bet. I think I had reads my opponent was folding a good amount, not raising much. We check back turn now, though, because we have some showdown. And now, again, we hit this weak pair, but we face this small sizing, again, indicating thin value. And when we think about our opponent's range, when specifically, they didn't bet the turn. So that indicates some hands that were looking, to maybe check fold. Maybe they could check fold air, or maybe some hands that are looking to check call, specifically maybe pairs of fives, pairs of jacks, weaker pairs of jacks, maybe some weak pairs of queens. Maybe our opponent thought we were bluffing a lot when check two, so, barreling. But they did call the flop, sorry. So, so it's quite likely that they have some pairs. So actually checking the turn means nothing. My bad. So they called the flop bet. So that limits how much air they can have, right? Because they won't be calling flop with air. And so what could they be betting here with? Well, their bluffs from the flop, well, there's some missed flush draws. But again, this sizing doesn't indicate too many bluffs. On the other hand, they could certainly have called the flop with pairs of fives to look to thin value, block bet the river now. And still pairs of queens. They could have also, again, turned a pair of jacks. They could have called with a jack high backdoor flush draw, or a hand like jack 10, which has some straight draw equity, or perhaps something like a jack high flush draw, right? They could have had the jack of hearts plus another heart. So there's some jacks here too, but the point is that our pair of fours doesn't only beats the bluffs, and still loses to all villains' value range. While if we raise it, we get to use our blocker effects. And by having this ace-4, we block villain's ace-3, which is plausible to still check back versus a limp this deep. Maybe not super likely, but the most likely aces to check back are the weak ones. So ace-3 is nice to block here. And then we also block, again, some sneaky, inducing plays with hands like 5-4, 4-deuce, queen-4, and jack-4, all of which are very plausible calls from the flop. So we use our pair instead to get these blocker effects. And then lastly, again, our ace doesn't really block any bluffs. Our opponent's less likely to have aces in the first place. And then second off, is less likely to bluff the river. They could just be check folding the river to get ace-high showdown. Similarly, our 4 doesn't block any bluffs. So in the end, we block basically no bluffs, and we do block a lot of potential bet calling hands. So we go in for the raise, and we get our fold. So again, these are two places where, rather than using my pair as a bluff catcher, because it's a pretty weak pair in a spot where I expect a lot of better pairs, instead I get to turn it into a bluff and use that for blocker effects. So let's do one last hand to show the point. So this is a hand of monotone flop. Decide to bluff the flop again, expecting probably a lot of folds. Villain does call. Turn pairs the board, and villain leads into us. So we have a flush draw here plus a gut shot, so I'm not really going anywhere. I'm in position. And we flat. And then the river's a 3. And villain barrels small again. So again, if we start thinking about what villain, sort of can have here, well, they can certainly have bluffs. There are some missed flush draws. They could have some trapping plays. But then they could also plausibly have a lot of sevens. Sevens could have made sense, given this relatively small size, to just value bet thin, thinking I'm going to check back a lot. And then would be still barreling very small on the river for sort of the same reasons. On top of that, our opponent has to be pretty worried about us having flushes and straights here, and full houses, and trip queens. Our range is very much uncapped after limping and just flatting the turn. Certainly uncapped in terms of nuts, right? Certainly we expect, your opponent should expect us to flat here with ace-high flushes, king-high flushes, a lot of flushes, full houses for sure. Maybe they expect queens to raise. But so we end up repping, having a lot of very strong hands here. And so it's even plausible that our opponent can still be doing this and looking to bet fold a weak queen. A weak queen could have also led the turn, or any queen, and then could be bet folding here given these things. So then when we look at blocker effects, we can think about why this hand makes sense. So we block all the nuts. I'm actually overbet shoving here. So when I'm shoving, villain's calling range should be very weighted towards very nutted hands. And here we block flushes and we block straights. Now it is a little bit unfortunate. It is probably a little bit more likely if our opponent's bluffing the turn. It's more likely maybe with a heart or with a straight draw, like 8-6. So it's not the most perfect blocker effects here. What would be better? Well, if we look back at the previous hands, like having like the ace of hearts or king of hearts here would probably be way better because you don't really block bluffs as often because again, it's ace high, king high, so more likely just to give up. And you block, stronger flushes, which is generally good. Although again, maybe we don't care about stronger flushes because we did limp pre and villain check back. So maybe that's not the biggest thing, but in particular, if we maybe didn't have the 8 here, maybe if we had a pair. So if we had something like a pair of 3s here with the 5 of hearts, right, or even like a 3 of hearts with the 5 of spades, right? If we had a 5 or 6 with a pair instead of the 8, that would maybe be a little bit better. But again, having a heart here is really good. Having the blockers to 5-6. We end up blocking all of the most relevant, like, major nuts. So we block a really large part of villain's call shove range. And this does look like a pretty weak rate bet. I do think this is still a lot of bluffs, but we can't call here, right? I mean, there's no room. Like, if I think my opponent's bluff heavy here, the only way I can defend and, use my, some blocker effects is by bluffing. So maybe we'd like to have a pair for better blocker effects, but again, maybe pairs want to call here. If I think my opponent's bluffy enough in this spot, maybe I am just calling my pairs, but I still get to then bluff raise by having some of these missed draws that actually block some of the nuts. All right, so that was using blocker effects for bluff raising. Blocker effects are really important in river play. I generally discourage people using blocker effects on flop and turn. They tend to be really negligible, and you're generally missing the big picture because there's more important stuff to worry about on flop and turn. But on the river, there's usually not much else. When we're looking at bluff raising, I mean, what else makes a good bluff? On previous streets, you can have value when called or not have value when called, depending on what you want. But on the river, like, if you're bluffing, like, you always have 0% equity when called, right? Every hand is sort of the same when called. So all you can change is how often they call you, and that's where blocker effects come in. So, this is this actual format of reviewing a specific spot here, bluff raising, is something that I do a lot in Spin Legends. We have a whole series now of videos of different individual spots, right? Broken down ranges and how to play our range, how to pick hands efficiently. What are the best bluffing hands? What are the best defending hands, depending on the spot? What kind of value range should we have? What sizing should we be using? And I think that this format of breaking down the game into spots and then taking these individual spots and reviewing them is a great way to just grow really fast as a player. So if you join us with Spin Legends, you'll have access to a whole lot of spots and a whole lot of analysis of this level. Cheers, and bye-bye.